I discovered that the Sunny Pines HOA was building 96 luxury homes on my inherited farmland. But when I found my grandfather's original property surveys, their entire development suddenly became my legal property. Would you believe their shocked faces when I revealed my trap at their own community meeting? I never thought I'd have to fight for land that already belonged to me. When Grandpa Joe died last March, I inherited his 200-acre farm outside Meadow Creek. The old place had been in our family for generations. I lived far away in the city with a busy job that kept me from visiting as often as I should have. My phone rang at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was Mrs. Thompson, Grandpa's neighbor for 40 years. "They're building houses on your property." Her voice shook with anger. "Big yellow machines started digging yesterday. You need to come quick." At first I thought she was confused. Maybe construction workers had crossed a boundary by mistake. But Mrs. Thompson wasn't one to exaggerate. "The Sunny Pines people put up signs all over," she continued. "They're planning almost 100 houses where Eastfields are." I threw clothes in a suitcase and drove straight to Meadow Creek, breaking speed limits the whole way. 5 hours later, I turned onto the dirt road leading to Grandpa's farmhouse. The familiar path felt different now. The peaceful countryside was interrupted by the rumble of heavy machinery. Dust clouds rose above the trees. As I crested the hill overlooking the eastern section of the property, my heart sank. A fleet of bulldozers and excavators tore into the soil where Grandpa used to grow corn and soybeans. Workers in hard hats moved around like ants, marking areas with bright orange spray paint. A large sign stood near the road. "Future home of Sunny Pines, East, 96 luxury homes, starting at $450,000. I parked my car and walked toward a woman standing apart from the workers. She wore spotless beige pants and a crisp white blouse. Despite the dusty surroundings, her hair was perfectly styled, and she held a clipboard while talking on her phone. "Excuse me," I said when she finished her call. "What's happening here?" She looked me up and down like I was a door-to-door salesman interrupting her day. "We're preparing for residential development," she said, her voice practiced and smooth. "Diane Reynolds, Sunny Pines Homeowners Association president." She extended her hand without warmth. "This is my land," I said, ignoring her handshake. "My grandfather, Joe Miller, owned this farm. He passed away recently, and I inherited it." Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There must be some misunderstanding. Sunny Pines Development purchased this parcel last year. We have all the necessary permits and approvals." "That's impossible," I said. "My grandfather would never sell this land." "Perhaps he didn't tell you." She sounded almost sorry for me. "The sale was finalized 9 months ago. We've been planning this expansion for years." My mind raced. Grandpa had been sick during his final months, but his mind remained sharp. He wouldn't have sold his beloved farm without telling me something wasn't right. "I need to see those documents," I demanded. "You're welcome to contact our legal department." Diane handed me a business card. "But I assure you everything is in order. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a schedule to maintain." She turned away, already dialing another number on her phone. I stood there feeling helpless as machines continued to tear up the soil that had fed my family for generations. Back at the farmhouse, Mrs. Thompson waited on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and a worried expression. "They started showing up with measuring tools about 3 months ago," she explained. "Your grandpa was furious. He kept saying they had no right, that they were trying to steal what wasn't theirs." "Did he mention selling any land?" I asked. "Never. Joe swore this farm would stay in your family forever." Mrs. Thompson's eyes watered. "The day before he went to the hospital for the last time, he was looking through his old office. Said he needed to find something important to protect the farm. Grandpa's office had remained untouched since his death. I hadn't had the heart to go through his things when I briefly visited for the funeral. Now I needed answers." The small room smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. Shelves lined the walls, stuffed with farming almanacs, family photo albums, and decades of careful records. Grandpa tracked everything: rainfall amounts, crop yields, equipment repairs, all written in his neat handwriting. Where'd he have kept property records? The filing cabinet seemed the obvious place to start. I pulled open the top drawer and found folders organized by year. Nothing about land sales or Sunny Pines. Hours passed as I searched. Night fell, and my eyes grew tired from reading faded documents by lamplight. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a loose floorboard under the desk. When I pressed it with my foot, it moved slightly. I knelt down and pried it open with a letter opener. Inside the small, hidden space was a metal box. The key hung from a nail on the underside of the desk. Inside the box, I found the deed to the farm, Grandpa's while naming me as his heir, and several yellowed property surveys. But most interesting was a letter addressed to me in Grandpa's handwriting. If you're reading this, it began, then, someone's trying to take what's ours. My hand shook as I read his words. Grandpa explained that developers had been eyeing his land for years. They had tried to pressure him into selling, but he always refused. In his final months, someone from Sunny Pines had visited repeatedly. The man claimed to need a simple signature for a road easement, bringing different papers each time. I never signed away my land, Grandpa wrote. If they say I did, it's a lie. Look at the original survey from 1910 and compare it to what's recorded at the county now. The truth is in the boundaries. I dug deeper into the box and found the original survey. It showed property lines that extended much further than I had realized. According to this document, Grandpa's farm was nearly 280 acres, not the 200 acres listed in current records. Sleep evaded me that night. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, comparing the old survey with newer maps. Something strange had happened over the decades. The eastern boundary had shifted, reducing our land. And it wasn't just the area under construction. According to these original documents, we owned land where part of the existing Sunny Pines development already stood. At dawn, I knew what I had to do. First, I needed a lawyer. Then I needed to understand exactly what Diane Reynolds and her HOA were up to. If they thought they could steal from my family, they were about to learn a painful lesson. I folded Grandpa's letter. They were about to learn a painful lesson. I folded Grandpa's letter and put it in my pocket. I won't let you down, I whispered to the empty room. Little did Diane know she hadn't just messed with a grieving grandchildren. She'd walked straight into a trap set by a man who had anticipated her moves even from the grave. I didn't sleep that night. By 8 a.m., I waited outside the office of Walter Franklin, the only property lawyer in Meadow Creek. His secretary looked surprised when I asked for an emergency appointment, but she squeezed me in before lunch. So you believe Sunny Pines is building on land that belongs to you? Walter said after I explained my situation. He was older than I expected, with thick glasses and a bow tie that seemed from another era. I spread the documents across his desk. These are the original surveys from 1910, updated in 1978. Compare them to the current county records. Walter studied both sets of papers, tracing boundary lines with his finger. His eyebrows rose higher with each passing minute. This is highly unusual, he finally said. According to these original documents, your property extends nearly half a mile further east than what's currently recorded. That would include not just the construction site, but also the existing Sunny Pines clubhouse and about 20 homes built 5 years ago. I finished for him. Walter removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. A boundary dispute of this magnitude won't be simple. We need to understand how and when these changes occurred in the official record. He called the county assessor's office, putting the call on speaker. After navigating a maze of departments, we learned something shocking. In 1984, a minor adjustment to the eastern boundary was recorded, just a 10-foot easement for utilities. But in 1997, a much larger change appeared, reducing the property by nearly 80 acres. The documentation was sparse, just a form with a signature that barely resembled Grandpa's. He would have been in the hospital that month, I said, checking the date. Triple bypass surgery. He couldn't have signed this. Walter's expression turned grave. That would constitute fraud. But proving it after all these years won't be easy. What can we do? I asked. File for an emergency injunction to halt construction immediately. Then petition the court to recognize the original boundaries based on the historic surveys. We'll need a professional surveyor to verify these old maps. As Walter prepared the emergency filing, I realized I needed more ammunition. I drove to the county records office and requested everything they had on Sunny Pines Development Company. Hours later, hidden in a back corner of the library with stacks of public records, I discovered gold. Sunny Pines wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a complex web of LLCs and holding companies. The same 6 names appeared. Diane Reynolds, her husband, Thomas Reynolds, County Commissioner James Harris, Planning Board Director Mark Wilson, and 2 others I didn't recognize. But the most interesting document was from just 3 months ago. A loan approval for $16 million to finance Sunny Pines, east with the land itself listed as collateral. My land. I took photos of everything with my phone and headed to my next stop. The offices of the Meadow Creek Gazette, our local newspaper. The editor, Tanya Williams, had known my grandfather. When I told her I was investigating potential fraud involving prominent local officials, her journalistic instincts perked up. I can't publish accusations without evidence, she warned. But I can look into the approval process for this development. It did seem to move unusually fast. Back at the farmhouse, I found Mrs. Thompson talking to another elderly neighbor, Mr. Grayson. When I mentioned Diane Reynolds, his face darkened. "That woman is the reason I sold my place," he said bitterly. "The HOA fine me every week for unapproved landscaping. I've been growing those tomatoes for 20 years. Then they said my workshop violated some rule they just made up. The fines kept coming until I couldn't afford to fight anymore." "How many others did this happen to?" I asked. "At least a dozen old-timers sold out in the last 5 years. Always for less than market value. Always the companies I later found out were connected to those Sunny Pines people. A pattern. Find vulnerable landowners. Harass them with fines and regulations. Force them to sell cheap, develop the land, and make millions. My grandfather had been their latest target, but he'd been one step ahead." My phone rang. Walter Franklin, the judge, granted our emergency injunction. He said construction has to stop immediately until a hearing next week. "But brace yourself, this is going to get ugly." I thanked him and hung up. Feeling a small victory, I drove back to the construction site with the court order in hand. The workers were packing up for the day. When I arrived, Diane's sleek black SUV still sat near the site office. She came out as I approached, phone to her ear as usual. When she saw me, her expression hardened. "Construction stops now," I said, handing her the court order. "Legal boundaries are in dispute." She scanned the document, her perfect composure cracking slightly. "This is ridiculous. We have every approval we need based on fraudulent boundaries. I have the original surveys." For the first time, uncertainty flashed in her eyes. It vanished quickly, replaced by cold determination. "This little stunt will cost you," she said quietly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do. 6 names on dozens of business filings. $16 million in loans using stolen land as collateral. County officials fast-tracking approvals for projects they secretly invest in." I hadn't planned to reveal how much I knew, but the look on her face was worth it. Diane's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "We could be reasonable. Perhaps you consider a generous offer for the remaining farmland. 7 figures. Immediate payment. Not interested. Everyone has a price." Her smile returned, confident and predatory. "Think about it. You don't even live here. What do you care about some old dirt? This old dirt has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not for sale." I turned to leave, feeling her eyes burning into my back. As I reached my car, she called out, "Commissioner Harris is my husband's golf partner. Judge Evans comes to my dinner parties. You think your injunction will last?" A slow, venomous smile. "You're nobody in this town now." I knew the battle wouldn't be easy. Diane Reynolds and her people had power, connections, and money. But what they didn't know was that I had seen cases like this before. In Brazil, a woman proved she was the rightful owner of the land where the town of Jericoacoara now stands. In the U.S., a man recovered an entire reservoir after proving that official records had been illegally altered. Their game wasn't new to me. They were experienced thieves, but I was an experienced fighter. The first hearing was scheduled for the following week. My lawyer, Walter Franklin, warned me that the local courts might be a problem. Judge Evans, who oversaw most property cases in Meadow Creek, was far too close to Diane. I couldn't trust the local system. I needed to bring attention to the case. The next day, I went to the Meadow Creek Gazette and brought all the documents I had collected from the Public Records Office. Tanya Williams, the editor-in-chief, read everything carefully, and for the first time, I saw a real spark of interest in her eyes. "If this is true, we're looking at one of the biggest land fraud scandals in the region," she said. "It's not just true, Tanya. I have proof." I showed her the altered records, the forged signatures, and Sunny Pine's history of fraud. She picked up her phone and made several calls. Within hours, a team of reporters was already investigating the case. In court, as expected, Diane arrived with an army of lawyers. They tried to argue that Sunny Pines had all the necessary documents, but Walter was relentless. He presented the original 1910 survey, proved that my grandfather never signed the papers altering the boundaries, and, most importantly, revealed that the county itself had facilitated the theft. Judge Evans, visibly uncomfortable, tried to downplay the case. "This is just a clerical error," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Nothing that can't be settled with financial compensation." "This isn't an error, Your Honor," I countered. "This is fraud." Diane smirked arrogantly. "We're willing to make a generous offer to settle this dispute. I don't want your money. I want my land back." She rolled her eyes, but her stance shifted. She knew this wouldn't go away easily. That night, I received my first anonymous threat. A letter with no signature was left on my farmhouse porch. Walk away. This won't end well for you. I tore the paper in half and threw it in the trash. Then, I drove back to the county records office. If there was a pattern, I wanted to see how many others had been victims. After hours of searching, I found dozens of cases. Small landowners who had been deceived, threatened, and forced to sell. Some had to leave town. Others simply gave up the fight. But I wasn't going to give up. I contacted some of these victims and organized a meeting at my farmhouse. As we sat around the table, I noticed something all their stories had in common. Every forced sale had happened after small, administrative boundary adjustments. And in every case, Diane Reynolds and Commissioner Harris were involved. With this new information, Walter filed a class action lawsuit. The case was no longer just about my farm. It became a systemic corruption investigation. The media started covering the scandal, and that made the wrong people nervous. Within 24 hours, my car was vandalized. In court, Sunny Pine's lawyers tried to argue that old documents no longer held legal weight, that they had owned the farm for years through established possession. But Walter fought back. He cited precedent cases, countered every argument, and then delivered the knockout blow. A forensic handwriting analysis proving that my grandfather's signature on a 1997 document was forged. The court had no choice but to issue a restraining order in my favor. For the first time, Diane lost her composure. She approached me after the hearing. "You think you've won?" She sneered. "This is just getting started." "Then keep playing," I replied. With every court victory, Sunny Pines lost ground. The media pressure and ongoing investigation sent Diane and her allies into a panic. Commissioner Harris resigned, and Mark Wilson, the planning board director, was suspended while the state investigated irregularities in project approvals. The war dragged on for months. Every hearing was a battle. Sunny Pine's lawyers filed appeals, tried to negotiate, tried to intimidate me. At one point, they offered me $5 million to walk away. I tore the offer in half in front of them. My land is worth more than that. In the end, state judges took over the case. And that was when everything collapsed for them. With undeniable proof of fraud, falsified documents, and secret deals between Sunny Pines and corrupt politicians, the court nullified all their land purchases and restored ownership to the rightful landowners. The final ruling came in a packed courtroom. When the judge slammed the gavel, declaring that my farm belonged to me and that Sunny Pines would have to demolish the illegally built houses, a heavy silence fell over the room. Diane, pale as a ghost, stood up and walked out without saying a word. I had won, but it still wasn't over. With Sunny Pines defeated, the next step was to sue them for damages. Diane thought she could just walk away, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. I wanted every penny back, and this time I was on the attack. The impact of the case spread far beyond Meadow Creek. National media covered every detail of the scandal. Talk shows debated the situation, and legal experts discussed how such a massive fraud had gone unnoticed for so long. My name was everywhere. I had gone from a simple heir fighting for his land to the central figure in one of the biggest property disputes in the country. This had unexpected consequences. Companies that had once ignored me now saw me as a key player in a multi-million-dollar business. Lawyers started reaching out with partnership offers. Investment funds wanted to buy stakes in the developments. Politicians tried to convince me that it would be wise to give up some of the land in exchange for future benefits. Everyone wanted a piece of what I had won. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. I received calls from banks, real estate developers, insurance companies, and even attorneys representing homeowners in Sunny Pines. Some families were in a panic, fearing eviction. Others were trying to sue the construction companies. The truth was, I now held the fate of hundreds of people in my hands. The court had given me complete ownership, but what was I supposed to do with all of this? That's when I started thinking about how to turn this victory into something even bigger, something that would guarantee my absolute control while avoiding years of exhausting legal battles. I didn't want to just demolish everything and force people out. That would cause chaos. But I also wasn't about to just give the land back for nothing. That's when the idea hit me. I wouldn't sell anything. I wouldn't give up anything. But I would allow them to continue running their businesses under the condition that every single property was legally mine. I would remain the sole owner, and they could continue operating developments, but only under my administration. The houses, commercial properties, hotels, and recreational areas would stay, but under my rules. The reaction was immediate. At first, the investors and developers refused to accept it. They argued that they had already invested millions in the area, and that it would be absurd for all of it to now belong to me. But the truth was, they had no choice. If I wanted to, I could demolish everything. And they knew it. More importantly, the banks knew it. And when the banks realized they could lose hundreds of millions of dollars in loans and ongoing projects, they were the first to pressure the companies into accepting my proposal. Contracts were drafted quickly. Every detail was reviewed to ensure that I had absolute control over the land and that companies couldn't make any changes without my approval. From now on, every construction project, every home sale, every lease agreement had to go through me. Then, the next obstacle appeared. The government realized that I now had more power than the local authorities. With this new agreement, I had become the largest private landowner in the region. That meant that all local tax revenue, tourism, and economic growth were now directly tied to me. Politicians started getting involved. Some state lawmakers wanted to pass legislation that would force me to give up parts of the land, arguing that it was dangerous for one man to have so much control. Political pressure started growing. The narrative shifted. I was no longer just a man who had defeated a corrupt group. I was now being painted as a land baron who had too much power. Some media outlets began to suggest that what I had done was no different from what Diane and her people had tried to do, except that now I was the one in charge. But I had already anticipated this. That's when I took inspiration from the Jericoacoara case in Brazil. There, a woman had proven that she was the rightful owner of all the land in what had become a booming tourist city. The government tried to take it from her, but in the end, the only viable solution was to negotiate a deal where she received royalties from tax revenue, tourism, and commercial leases. I applied the same strategy. Instead of getting into a new legal war that could drag on for years, I made a proposal to the state. I agreed to let the government manage certain public areas like parks, schools, and hospitals, but in exchange, I would receive a percentage of all revenue generated there. This included property taxes, tourism fees, and profits from businesses operating on my land. It was a checkmate move. The government accepted. Not only had I secured control over most of the territory, but I had also created a permanent income stream. Every month, I received direct payments from the government, from the taxes collected on what was once my land. The following months were a total transformation. The old Sunny Pines development signs were removed. Now, everything bore my name. The companies signed their new contracts and started operating under my terms. Diane Reynolds tried to fight the deal. She appealed to the state courts, tried to gain support from politicians who had once owed her favors, but no one wanted to take the risk. The scandal had destroyed her financially and politically. Commissioner Harris was arrested for corruption, and more investigations started targeting other key figures involved in the fraud. And me? I became the most powerful man in the region. Every single financial transaction within my property generated revenue for me. Every time someone bought a house, every tourist who stayed at a hotel, every business that paid taxes, all of it contributed to my growing fortune. And the most ironic part? The same companies that tried to steal from me were now working for me. The money started coming in before I could even grasp the magnitude of what was happening. Within the first month after signing the contracts, the financial reports showed numbers I had never imagined seeing. What began as a dispute over a piece of land inherited from my grandfather had turned into an empire. I owned everything. Every inch of that land, every brick, every paved road, every commercial building erected on the soil that legally belonged to me. I had not only reclaimed what was already mine, I transformed it into the kind of wealth that, for generations, made kings and billionaires throughout history. The numbers kept rising. Companies that once saw me as an obstacle now recognized me as the true owner of the game. They had no choice but to negotiate with me. Banks, investors, construction firms, politicians, everyone wanted to ensure that I kept them inside the city. But I never forgot who tried to destroy me. I watched Diane Reynolds sink further and further. Without her political connections, without her land, without her reputation, she went from being a powerful figure in Meadow Creek to someone ridiculed and avoided. Her husband, Thomas Reynolds, was one of the first to abandon her. After signing the contracts with me, ensuring that businesses would continue operating under my administration, Diane became irrelevant. He switched to the winning side, like all those who have no principles, only interests. She tried appealing to the courts one last time, claiming that my new position was a monopoly, that I was exploiting the system in the same way she had before. But no one listened. No one wants to hear the complaints of a gambler who bet everything and lost. She didn't care when she tried to take what belonged to me, and now no one cared she lost everything. And I never regretted anything, because in the end, justice never fails. It may take time, it may seem like the corrupt and deceitful win at first, but everything balances out. My grandfather knew that. He kept those old documents because he knew that sooner or later, someone would try to cheat him. He died without seeing this victory, but every dollar that now entered my account was proof that he was right. And there was nothing wrong with that. The truth is, this is how the elite of every country has built its wealth. It has always been about land. In the end, the only thing that truly matters is control over land, because whoever owns the land owns the power. The world's wealthiest didn't start with technology, banks, or innovative companies. They started with land. Kings, barons, feudal lords, great landowners. They shaped the rules of society for centuries because they understood what others didn't. Today, the game is still the same. The old titles have been replaced by modern contracts, but the essence hasn't changed. The same thing happened in Brazil, and few people realize the importance of what took place. A woman proved in court that she legally owned an entire tourist town. She didn't have to fight a housing development like I did. She had to fight an entire country. For years, her family owned land where hotels, restaurants, roads, and an entire tourism economy were later built. Without her consent, without compensation. When she took the case to court, the government tried to discredit her, label her an opportunist. But she had the right documents, and she had the truth on her side. In 2024, the government had no choice but to negotiate. They couldn't expropriate the land without paying her billions in compensation. The only solution was to reach a deal. She would remain the sole owner, while the government would manage part of the area and pay her royalties from taxes, tourism, and commercial leases. Overnight, she became one of the most powerful women in the country. With a single lawsuit, she put an entire city to work for her. And I did the exact same thing here. My name was now registered in every corner of Meadow Creek. The entire city's economy ran through me. Every house sold paid me. Every company opening a store there paid me. Every tourist visiting the resorts paid me. Even the government paid me, because instead of fighting me, they decided it was easier to pay me to keep what was already built. And that is the only truth that matters. Because justice always wins. It may take time, it may seem impossible at first, but those who truly understand how the world works know that, in the end, whoever owns the land owns everything. And now I own everything.